All right, let's talk about the fascist worldview, the liberal worldview, and the communist worldview. First, the fascists.
You can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else, but we live in a world, in the real world, Jake, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world that have existed since the beginning of time.
The iron laws of the world since the beginning of time? Really, Stephen? You do know that human beings have been around for about 300,000 years, and for the vast majority of that time, we lived in egalitarian, hunter-gatherer groups with a cooperative way of life. Of course, there were conflicts between tribes, particularly when resources were scarce. But it wasn't until settled agriculture was developed about 12,000 years ago that you first had class divisions, patriarchy, and large-scale warfare between states. And even then, human civilizations developed legal codes from ancient Mesopotamia to the post-World War II international niceties that Stephen Miller wants to throw out, that did at least attempt to mitigate some of the raw power relations where the strong can just impose their will on the weak. So no, strength, power, and force is not the iron law since the beginning of time. But Stephen Miller does have a point that these international niceties have not stopped the powerful from using force on others. With that in mind, let's look at the liberal worldview.
That's Stephen Miller saying that we live in a world where might makes right and whoever can beat up somebody else is going to get their way. One of America's greatest accomplishments was leading humanity out of that into a world where values and rules matter at least as much as brute force.
Really, Pete? Since World War II and the rules-based order, the U.S. has killed 10 million people in its wars under Republicans and Democrats. In contrast to the hypocrisy of liberals like Pete Buttigieg, the truth is that as long as you have a system of profound inequality, like the system of capitalism imperialism, brute force will always be the ultimate decider, and the values and rules will always be on the terms of that system. And in contrast to the Nazi worldview of Stephen Miller, where the strong conquer the weak and superior races conquer inferior races,
these are the iron laws of the world that have existed since the beginning of time.
The truth is, number one, it has not always been this way. And number two, and most importantly, we are now at a point in human history where we can move beyond these kinds of antagonistic social divisions because we have the wealth and technology to provide an abundance for everyone on the planet. The only thing standing in the way is a tiny class of capitalist exploiters, police and militaries that enforce their interests, and the philosophies that justify this system. With that in mind, let's look at a radically different communist worldview.
You know, when people, for example, talk about human nature, well, that's just human nature. People are selfish, The reason people say that is it's a reflection of the capitalist system they live under, where people are forced to compete with each other in order to, to even advance individually, and in many cases, even in order to survive. But with a planned economy based on a collective ownership of the basic means of creating all the wealth of society, you can move beyond that, where that's guaranteed. And then at the same time, on that foundation, you can bring about the transformation of people's thinking to where they no longer are, quote unquote, selfish in the way they are conditioned to be under this system. So, that human nature changes with the nature of the system. All this is possible now. And not only is it possible, it cries out to be urgently done before this system, literally puts an end to, at least to human civilization as we know it, which is a very real question. But even if it didn't do that, it creates and enforces a whole dimension of horror for humanity that is not only horrific, but is totally unnecessary.